Hey everybody, it is Dean Z speaking to you from Jeffries Hall. I am really excited to talk to you today about the transfer process because that is the time of year that we are in right now in the admissions office. And I feel like it's a part of the admissions process that kind of flies under the wire a little bit. Now, some of you may be interested in transferring. I certainly hope so. But even if you're not, I feel like, this is information that is, like I say, not really widely known and is worth thinking about. So first, as a practical matter, you have to transfer, you can only transfer rather, after your first year. You can't transfer after your second year. You will get credit for that first year of first year of studies if you transfer to a new school, so you will still graduate in 3 years. If you were to try to transfer at some later date, you'd have to give up some of your credits. Schools won't, for the most part, aren't going to give you credit for work except for in the first year. So you need to be thinking about this and be ready to move once you get your 1L grades. So why might someone want to transfer? The main reason why you should think about transferring is career opportunities. If you want to do something very specific with your law degree and you're at a school that you worry is not going to be able to support you in those goals, and that could run the gamut from working at some giant law firm to being a public defender at a particular kind of place, or working for a particular governmental organization, doing JAG, whatever. There's different kinds of legal opportunities, employment opportunities that some schools really have a strength in. So that is a really good reason to transfer. Why might you not want to transfer? In order to transfer, you probably have already racked up a pretty strong record at your entering law school. So you have faculty, you've gotten good grades, you have faculty who are really invested in you. Maybe you're on their law review or whatever their premier journal is. You have opportunities that are going to come your way by having been very successful at your home institution, your initial institution. And to give all that up is a sacrifice. Likewise, it's hard to relocate, especially if you're looking at schools that are not in the geographic area that you are already in. That's expensive, that's time consuming, that's anxiety producing. So you have to make a whole new group of friends. So all of that is a big cost. So I do not think that transferring is something that should be taken lightly. Another reason to transfer that I didn't mention is maybe you're just very unhappy at the school that you chose, and that is, happiness is not unimportant, as we say. So if you're at the University of Michigan and maybe Ann Arbor is just not your jam, right? Maybe it seems like too small a city and New York is the only place you can draw a real breath. Well, Ann Arbor is not New York, so you should think about transferring. Maybe you have family members somewhere else and you just really are missing being far from them. So these are all valid reasons. But even with those reasons in mind, I would be cautious about going to a school where you might be giving up opportunities. You got to keep in mind, you're at law school to have a certain kind of career, a certain kind of future, and 3 years is a good chunk of time. 2 years is a smaller chunk of time, and that's what we're talking about if you're thinking about transferring. So to give up, real opportunities in order to have an increase in happiness, I guess I'd say, you just have to balance those things and think about what you're giving up and exactly how unhappy you are. So it's a trade-off. Okay, so I've told you the pros, the cons, you've thought about it. How do you go about doing it? So one great thing about the transfer process from the point of view of the applicant is, for the most part, schools no longer really care about the LSAT and the undergraduate GPA. The function of those metrics in the admissions process, in the first year process, is to try to predict how you will do in law school. We no longer need to predict this at the transfer stage. We have your first year grades. I'm sure there are schools that will take a look at it and put some weight on it. But for the most part, they are really not of interest at the transfer process. What else plays a role? First year grades, the strength of the school at which you earned those grades. So if you have all A's, I can't name specific schools, that's just rude, but if you have all A's at a school, if it's a school with a lot of other really strong students, that is more meaningful than if you have all A's at a school where most of the other students are not as strong as, say, Harvard. I think it's always fine to say Harvard as an example of a good school. No one gets their feelings hurt about that. Okay, so that's part of the calculus. Two other big factors I would say is what are you doing in your first year summer, and what does your letter of recommendation look like? Most schools require a faculty letter of recommendation. And then, of course, schools will have, very specific components of the application. You'll have to look those up. They're going to vary a little bit from school to school, but those are the factors that are, the most predictive of success in this process. Some schools, interestingly, will only require 1 semester of grades. Most schools require 2, but that seems to be changing for reasons that have to do with the legal hiring market. So it used to be that hiring for your second year summer really didn't start until the end of the summer after your first year. That has accelerated, and I'm filming this in June, and lots of hiring is already going on at big firms. So schools are trying to get people admitted earlier. So I can tell you that at Michigan, we are experimenting with a couple of people for whom we have just 1 semester of grades that are very, very strong. And maybe we will be able to move to a system and feel comfortable moving to a system that just requires 1 semester of grades. But I don't like to take risks, and because as I already mentioned, there's a lot of costs to anyone who's choosing to transfer. I don't want to take a risk with that person's happiness and livelihood. So that's just an aside. Now, I mentioned the importance of the letter of recommendation from a faculty member. If possible, if you feel comfortable, what would be ideal is to get 2 letters of rec. One, I think, from a doctrinal faculty member, black letter law, torts, crim law, constitutional law, and one from your legal writing professor. Now, most people get to know their legal writing professors fairly well because those are usually smaller classes than the doctrinal classes. So we see a lot of letters of rec from those classes. But at the same time, schools take very different approaches to their legal writing. So, and if I'm not familiar with that, there might be a small asterisk next to one of those letters. So at Michigan, we have full-time permanent faculty members teaching legal writing. Some schools have people who've done it for 1 year and then they move on and do something else. Some schools have exclusively adjuncts, people who are practicing law in the area who teach legal writing. That's of less value to me because they don't have as strong a historic comparison to other law students, and their assessment of who's a very strong law student is less compelling, say, than a doctrinal faculty member who, even if it's their first year, at least had 70 or 80 other people to compare you to for the most part. So it's nice to get both, though, because legal writing is obviously an important part of success in the legal profession. If you can only get one, I'd go with the doctrinal. But if you can only get legal writing, well, that's fine too. But you want a strong letter, someone who can really sing your praises. I recognize that can be awkward because you are asking to transfer away from the school where this person is teaching. But in my observation and my experience, faculty are very generous about that. They truly seem to want their students, especially the students that are shooting the lights out, they really want the best for them. So I have seen extremely generous and enthusiastic letters of support from a wide range of institutions. So it can be awkward to ask, but I think you should go in expecting that they want to help you. Now, the final factor that you might consider, most schools want to know, why do you want to transfer to us? And often it's just sort of a general I want to get this kind of job, and I think you send people to this kind of job answer, and that's fine. But if you have something more specific, if you have a family member in the area, or if you're from there, or if that's your city of your dreams, whatever it is, if you can be more specific, always be as specific as possible. Don't hesitate to tell us something about your family situation, for example, if that's a big part of why you want to transfer. I'll tell you that I've been working with a student this year who's interested in transferring for personal reasons, and I've been trying to give her a lot of guidance about how to approach the why XYZ school essay and what schools to be looking for. And she is delightfully humble about what she thinks her prospects are. And as an admissions professional, I will tell you that her prospects are very good. So how do you assess if you don't feel comfortable asking your dean of admissions? How do you assess your prospects? Data. So the ABA required disclosures.org, which I have referred people to in the past, has data on how many people transfer out of a given school and how many people transfer in. The data, unfortunately, is not the whole picture, and I'll explain why, but it's a good starting point. So there are a handful of schools that are admitting 50 or more people a year, or enrolling 50 or more transfers a year, and presumably they are admitting more than that. They probably don't get everybody that they admit. And I'll just tell you what they are. They're Georgetown, George Washington, Columbia, Harvard, and NYU. Not coincidentally, those are all big institutions to begin with, so they have more room for transfers, so that's not surprising. But there are about 30 schools that admit 10 or more applicants per year. So that's a fair number of people. And then there's a good 30 schools that don't admit anybody, maybe 1 or 0 people a year. So, but most schools are admitting at least some. So look for that. And then the ABA also provides data about the 75th, 50th, and 25th percentile of the first year grades of the people who are getting admitted. So, it depends on the school, obviously. But I will tell you that I see one school here that admits, on average, the 50th percentile is 2.94. So that's encouraging. If you want to go to that school, you probably have a pretty good shot of getting there. But most schools are looking for people with, very solid grades, like 3.5 and up. And of course that, as I mentioned, is balanced against the strength of the institution. And that's the piece of the data that you don't have readily available, is knowing from what schools is the school in question admitting. So, there are many schools where very few people transfer out because people are, for the most part, very happy with their experience at those schools. If you're in those tend to be, strong schools with good employment prospects. If you're at one of those schools and you're applying to another, a peer institution, your chances are very good because schools don't see people from those institutions, and they have a lot of confidence about what it means. So the woman I mentioned I'm working with, I explained to her, like, the school you're targeting, it doesn't see applicants from Michigan very often. Last year we had 2 people who transferred out. So they're going to be thrilled. And in addition, you have really strong grades. She said, but they hardly admit anybody, and the grades are so strong. You have a very good shot. So that data is not available. I just know that. But you could balance it by looking at how many people transfer. That information is available. How many people are transferring from your institution. So that would give you some sense of, market-wise, how many people are just like you on the market, on the transfer market. So that's a little bit of information that might be helpful. All right. I think that's all I have to tell you about the transfer process. I hope that's helpful. And, I think you should, if you really have good reasons for transferring, you should go forth in confidence. But you should think carefully because you are giving something up that's meaningful if you're transferring. Okay, now for the part of our program, the law-related something or other. I'm filming this at a time where we have just concluded the trial of former President Trump. And so that's one of those trials that got a lot of coverage. And I heard over and over something that drove me crazy. At the beginning of the trial, people kept talking about the opening argument. What's wrong with that, you might ask? It's actually called the opening statement. It's not an argument. At the end, there's a closing argument. But the opening bit is supposed to just be a flat-out statement of facts, like very neutral. Here's the elements that we need to prove if you're the prosecutor. Here's the evidence you're going to see that supports those elements. Here's how we're going to do it. It's a statement. And at the end, they make the argument where they say, did you hear what happened here? This shows how right we were. Whether you're defense or prosecution, you get to make a statement and you get to make an argument. I don't know. I don't have anything more to say than that. Just don't call it an opening argument. And yeah, be crazy with me. Thank you. Okay. That's all I got. Thank you, as always, for watching or listening. If you have any questions, please email us at law.jd.admissions@umich.edu and put vlog in the subject line. If you have any comments or anything you wanted to share publicly, please put it in the comments below. And as always, thank you to my dear friend Dustin Johnston. And wherever you go, go blue.